Today, it's all about optimal stretching with the goal of actually doing something effective about pain. Yeah, for pain all over the body. And there are a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of info that, in my view, isn't right, that could be done a lot better. And I want to explain how to improve those things so you can understand it. Because if you understand it, you can relate to it. So watch the whole video. You'll find out things you've probably never heard before, and some of them will likely surprise you. And the very last tip, the one that builds on the others, is the most important. Stay tuned. I think a lot of people stretch the wrong way, especially when they're stretching to try to get rid of their persistent pain. And there are different criteria, and we'll go through them all so you can see what I think proper stretching is, exactly how to perform it correctly, step by step, and how to get the full lasting effect. First off, it's about intensity. Intensity, meaning when you stretch, you might have noticed you start to feel a pull. Pull it a little, then a bit more, then even more. And now here's a very, very important point to note, so listen. You hear it all the time, and people are taught this. Stop stretching when it starts to hurt. That's the common instruction everyone gets and often hears repeated. So as soon as that pull, that tension turns into pain, they stop and don't stretch any further. And that's, in my opinion, a really, really big mistake, because then it just gets stretched subtly a little more. Yes, let's pause here for a moment. It's about intensity. First, so what should the intensity be? The intensity should be such that in terms of effect, when it starts to hurt, it doesn't immediately become so painful that everything is awful, but instead increases gradually so it's still manageable. It's a slow build-up, and you've got it completely under your own control the entire time. You might notice it, or it's just a little pain. Then you breathe, muster courage, and slowly go in a bit further, pushing a touch more. Then the pain gets a little worse, but you think, well, I know exactly why I'm doing this right now. I want to get rid of my pain. And if it hurts a little now, much less than the pain I'm trying to work against, then that's perfectly fine with me. And then it ramps up a little more, and a little more each time after that, and a little more still. And then you wonder, is this still okay? Maybe you're afraid because you've heard, oh, if you have osteoarthritis and pain, you mustn't stretch because it'll do harm. Shake all of that right out of your head. Trust your body completely. Because if you learn to listen to your body, it will give you the exact information you need to act correctly each time, so you never have to doubt or second-guess yourself ever again. So go in a bit more, then a bit more again, and that slight pain will gradually grow into stronger pain and maybe even a severe, intense pain that becomes hard to ignore. But you know why you're doing it, so your psyche comes into play. Is that something threatening? No, it's not threatening. I can stop at any time and easily get out of the stretch whenever I choose to. That means you can stay totally relaxed, and that's the important thing, and still feel completely safe and in control without fear, because fear makes you tense. So you can keep easing further into the stretch until you notice, okay, I want an effect and it already really hurts. But it's really just on the verge of starting to tip over now. What exactly do I mean when I say tipping, like falling out of balance? By tipping, I mean, you might know the word Wohlfühlschmerz. At first, that's kind of an apparent contradiction. Feeling good and pain, can that work? Yeah, it can. You just tried it. If it hurts a bit, that's still part of feeling good. So now you're asking yourself, is that still feel-good pain? Is this pain still positive? You watch your breath. Can I just breathe in and out calmly, staying with this gentle, steady rhythm? That's a sign it's still in the right zone, meaning it's not too intense just yet, for now. And that way you can do more and more. With every practice, of course, your ability to notice it improves. You can go further and further into the zone where you can say, that's still a comfortable pain. That's still bearable. You can let your breath flow, relaxed and steady the whole time. You don't tense up when exhaling. And then it starts. If you go in a bit further, you can go ahead. Nothing bad will happen. Push a little past that limit, and then it becomes negative. At first, it's slightly negative. You're just unsure. Then it gets more negative. And then at some point, you notice your toes curling up in your shoes. You might even have to clench your fist tightly. You have to push back mentally, and that's the clear sign. It's really just far too much now. We stretch to relax our muscles and fascia. We know from 38 years experience in clinical practice that most pain is connected to that, one way or another. That muscles and fascia pull too strongly and are overly tense, so we want to relax them. But if you have to tense up against something to tough it out, what do you get? In your brain, you create a sustained holding pattern of tension. Like when it's cold in winter, you pull your shoulders up and tension comes in. And that's not what we want. So that's exactly the limit where I'd say, from my experience, the closer you get to it, the better the payoff from the time you put in. You'll see noticeably stronger results for the effort you invest, and those gains will compound over time. Because stretching and doing exercises are always about time and about the time. Keeping it as minimal as possible while still getting the best possible overall effect, that's exactly the limit to take into account. And to make that even easier to follow, you may have been to the doctor, to the therapist, and moved that pain scale, that visual analog scale. It goes from 0 to 10, or from a smiley to really angry looking, frowning faces on the scale. Really agonized looking, and then you have to slide it to where your pain is. 10 means that's the absolute worst pain you could possibly imagine. It doesn't get any worse. That's a 10. And we've found, after long runs of tests, that 8 is exactly the tipping point where it flips from positive to negative, as our repeated trials consistently showed. As I mentioned a moment ago, that's at 7.9 actually, for the mathematicians among you in the audience right this moment. So just a little bit below an 8, that's the best intensity for stretching. That's where you'll get the greatest effect with the least amount of time invested. That's when the signal for your body to actually change, to let go of the tension and keep it released over the long term, is at its strongest and most effective, helping it remain that way over time. That's factor number 1. Factor number 2 is simply time itself. The amount of stretch time used, and seriously ask yourself how you originally picked that up in the first place. And if you don't know our system yet, I'm pretty sure that you're one of those people who maybe stretch a lot, who tend to stretch quite frequently throughout the day. Pop in briefly every now and then, hold it properly for about 10 seconds, 15 seconds, maybe even up to 30, but very, very rarely longer. There's a reason. The thing is, we all sadly have far too little time these days. And when we stretch, that's already a really good move. But instinctively, you don't want to spend too long on it, especially if you don't know what role time plays, and that's perfectly understandable to most people. And there's a connection that fascia research has shown, and it's pretty clear. When we stretch, we're trying to stretch the structure. So muscles, fascia, everything that gets in the way of movement should be stretched and gently released. And the fascia play a very big role in that. In fact, there are actually quite a few different kinds of fascia, and the kind of fascia you really need to target when stretching, to take the tension out of the whole body. That particular kind of fascia only really starts to respond after roughly about 30 seconds, give or take, of course. These aren't mathematically exact figures, but roughly after 30 seconds, these fascia only start to give. Before that, they're firm, rock stiff. Imagine a piece of rubber. Like, say, the rubber band from a preserving jar, a really heavy-duty one. You pull it, and then, when you get to that length, it kind of stops at first. Then you pull more and more, and then slowly something starts to move, almost imperceptibly at first. You can picture it roughly like that in your mind. That means we need to stretch it out for a little bit longer than 30 full seconds, so hold it a little longer. And so you can do that full of motivation. I'll now explain why, after 38 years of experience, although I must say, when it comes to stretching, my experience goes back even further, because I've done martial arts my whole life. And martial arts have a lot to do with flexibility. Above all, when you kick, you want to defend yourself by getting your foot to the attacker's head to stop or control them and create distance to escape or gain the upper hand. That means you've got to be pretty flexible in the hips. And I just noticed, actually long before the pain therapy started, I always had to look for stretching methods because of time constraints, so I was constantly on the hunt for quick, effective stretches I could squeeze into a tight schedule. That get as much effect as possible with very little time, and I always knew that those 15 to 30 seconds would never be nearly enough to make a real, lasting difference. But with pain therapy, it became much clearer because we'd observed thousands of patients and tracked the effectiveness of the exercises, watching clear improvements unfold right before our eyes. We even did research on ourselves and so on. And what emerged was a 2-minute window, a short period in which the effects were most clearly apparent. Let me quickly explain how that emerged. when we have a coordinate system and the time axis right down here below. Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, one after the other, in sequence, step by step, for the moment. This is the stretch length. And here, we basically have the stretching effect. And we'll set it, here we've got 100%. So 100% now means the stretch we can achieve in a single action, the full amount in just one single move. You're doing an exercise and want to change something there, to almost bring about a change in the muscle's length. And then the 100% is this line here. And we found that during the first 30 seconds, very little really happens. And then it starts to pick up. Something like this, up to the second minute. And then it starts to flatten out, and after that it more or less goes on kind of like this for a while. That means not much happens here, then up until the second minute. A whole lot happens, and afterwards there's still a little more going on, but overall it's not nearly as much as before. So yoga systems, some of them hold stretches for 5 minutes, and they start here, which we might reach after 2 minutes maybe. That's kind of a little high. I'll have to fix it afterwards, of course. It looks more like this. There's still a little bit going on, but not very much anymore, to be honest. What do we want to achieve with this stretch now? We want to get as much as possible in as little time. And if we, from here, do the first 2 minutes, maybe 2.5, that's a bit variable, depending on how you feel and how smoothly it goes for you. If we shape the stretch here, then during the allotted time, so much happens that it's worth making use of it, so that overall, if we repeat it daily or at certain intervals, we build up lasting benefits and start to notice steady improvements over time. Really make very good, steady and lasting progress. That's it for the length of the stretch. Number 3. This is about the technique of stretching. I'll just jot that up here at the top now. Number 3. The technique. You all know regular stretching, passive stretching. That means I move into a stretch. And an external force, the wall, the floor, the door frame, pushes my arms farther and farther back. And I do that for 2 minutes. That gives me a really good result. I get a really good result overall. It's called passive stretching because an external force passively pushes me progressively further into the stretch each and every time. Passive stretching has the big advantage that you can crank up the intensity, the force with which I'm being pushed back. Can be raised to its absolute maximum and held indefinitely since an external force is available without limit. The more I turn when I'm standing at the wall, the more I can drive force into that rotation and really push the stretch up to the intensity we talked about earlier, exactly as we discussed. But the body needs more than just passive stretching. So after the first 30 seconds, when the tissue starts to give, we bring in targeted strength training to reinforce and help stabilize that range. So the wall pushes my arm back, the wall holds my hand in place, and then I press as hard as I can with the muscles that are currently being stretched, driving into the wall with my full force, squeezing and holding that effort for several seconds. Important, there's absolutely no movement at all. It's what's called an isometric countertension, a contraction. So that means the muscle is currently held at its absolute maximum length at this particular moment in time, right now. And at that maximum length, the muscles have practically no strength left to produce any meaningful force. They've got practically no strength. Why? Because they've never been at that length before. That means there couldn't have been any training either. Now, if I didn't do the countertension, nothing would have adapted to that length yet. What would happen when you stretch? If I keep stretching further and further, keep lengthening without adding any strengthening or deliberate strength training, then the body gradually unlearns more and more, losing its capacity to generate and coordinate force. To properly recruit the joint. By recruit, I mean using the right tensions in the agonists and antagonists, the muscles on one side and those on the other, working together in coordinated balance, to tune it so the joint tracking is optimal, You might know the effect. Someone in your circle may be hypermobile and therefore have unusually loose, flexible joints and often struggle with joint stability. Hypermobile means they're so relaxed, people can bend all over, they can touch their thumb to their forearm, and can do really huge stretches without any effort whatsoever. Because they're hypermobile, a lot of those hypermobile people have pain issues, often chronic and recurring. Now you're wondering, how can that be, Roland? You've been saying all along that pain comes from too much tension, haven't you? Isn't that what you meant earlier? That's true for most people. But imagine the body now has specific muscle lengths it can target and even actively aim for and hold when necessary. And sometimes it keeps them without you noticing. Then we just keep pushing the stretch further in. Hypermobile people have that from the get-go. And what's missing now in the hypermobile, and also in people who keep stretching further, who basically make themselves hypermobile, they lack sufficient strength at those joint angles to control the joint geometrically, so they can't properly stabilize it under load or guide movement accurately. What is correct activation of the joint? In my assessment, in my opinion, it's exactly the joint movement. For example, the rolling and gliding motion in the knee joint. That transmits maximum force while producing minimal wear, and the body constantly tries to achieve that as optimally as possible. And the body, which has receptors everywhere that measure everything, muscle strength, tension, movement, even acceleration and deceleration, it's all measured and goes into the central computer. And if the body decides, this is my theory and I'm convinced it's right, that the joint is being overloaded because the muscles can't work together properly, and so it sets off compensatory patterns that put extra strain on the joint. Because, for example, there's not enough strength. Even then, the body sends a warning pain signal to alert you. And I think this warning pain is the kind of pain that many hypermobile people experience. And why am I so sure that's true? Because with hypermobile people, people would now say, yeah, you don't even need to stretch. I say, no, wrong. Stretch anyway with our exercises, with our bottleneck exercises, just like we recommend. Why? Because there it really doesn't matter whether you move the arm from here all the way to way back there, or end up crossed behind you, or anything like that at all. That's not the goal, but they stretch back to their normal length where they notice it's starting to tighten a bit. But then you get the strength training we just talked about, that second phase where you progressively build strength in the muscle while it's held lengthened. And in a miraculous way, in quotes of course, the pain then pretty much disappears for many hypermobile people because the strength gradually comes in. And that further strongly backs up my theory that passive stretching has to be consistently and deliberately paired with active counterforce, so the body can use its joints optimally and have as much strength as possible available across all angles of movement. And everyone already has that strengthening idea in their head. Strength is important. Strength helps against pain too. Let's just tick that off quickly. You really have to look closely when someone is in pain. Does traditional strength training, like using machines or doing free exercises, like pull-ups or push-ups, because many of these strength exercises are often done with restricted movement patterns. Creates extra tension. A lot of people tend to believe that strength training shields the joint from injury, and that strength training completely eliminates pain in many instances. I see that very, very differently. With strength training, something often happens that you really don't want, namely that a tension in the body. A tightening of the muscles, in fact, often becomes noticeably even bigger. That's also why many people who do strength training often end up developing persistent pain because of it. Many people notice quite clearly that the more strength training they do on those machines, the stiffer and less mobile they typically become. And that's a pretty clear sign of what's going on, what's happening there. But it doesn't always happen, though, necessarily. And there are people who can do their strength work in a way that you don't end up shortened, provided they focus on proper technique and control. I'll give an example. Lots of people do pull-ups and only really ever do them at that particular angle. Why? Because your muscles get nice and thick, but not as long. Yet, if you really let yourself hang all the way down and fully relax your shoulders when doing pull-ups, fully extended, many people warn it can seriously damage your joints. I think that's a huge mistake. It's actually exactly the opposite. You can even do strength training and your muscles actually stay long. But with patience, we've come to say over the years, please refrain from conventional strength training for now, because it does require a certain level of knowledge, a certain amount of practice, to set up this shortening style training so the muscle shortenings stay fairly small and so nothing gets too overloaded. Just so. You can follow along here, but strength itself is extremely important. The oak that stands firm. That's truly important. Real strength in the joints. But when the storm comes and it's too strong, the oak will eventually break apart completely. Then we need bamboo. Bamboo bends, it gives way. And what we do with this training is combine the oak's qualities with the bamboo's, making us more resilient in both body and mind. So the strength, when it's needed, is there. But if the force gets too great, for example, if I get snagged while I'm skiing and my arm gets caught on a tree, and I might get yanked or injured as a result, because when I stretch my arms out to the sides in joy, the chest muscle, which is too short and not flexible, can lever the shoulder joint out, popping the ball out of the socket. If at the moment when the arm gets pushed back hard by the tree I'm caught on, if the body's flexible enough, it can instantly let go of the tension, turn into bamboo, and come out of it completely unhurt and perfectly unharmed. And this principle is fully built into our exercises. You can extrapolate straight away that, if you think about what that means, the risk of muscles getting injured is probably significantly reduced in everyday practice. Muscles trained that way are far less likely to be injured than stiff muscles that can't give way or adapt. In these second 30 seconds, we push this strength training to the absolute max, going as hard as we possibly can. That's maximal strength training. That means I push as hard as I can. Back to the example. I'm standing at the wall, stretching my chest, and I press against it as hard as I possibly can, so the training stimulus is intense again and actually effective. That gets applied. And we do that 3 times, and every time you do the exercise, you learn to recruit more muscle fibers, which allows that strength to steadily build and keep increasing more and more over time, gradually becoming noticeably stronger. That's a training effect. Then we've already got 1 minute gone. Every time we release after that 3-time squeeze, the muscle is already really quite heavily pre-fatigued from the strength training, noticeably so. And when we relax, we can go deeper into the stretch. That means in the second phase, the strength work becomes more effective. Add strength training. It strengthens the muscle at that length, and every time after, I can go a whole lot further into the stretch with steady, consistent practice over time. Because that's the basic overall pull, constantly getting deeper into the stretch during a session or exercise, so I get much more effect and achieve noticeably better, longer-lasting results. Now we're at the next phase, the next 30 seconds, roughly somewhere between about a minute and 30 seconds, give or take. Now it's about this. You need to realize in everyday life nowadays, we already have loads of movement restrictions because we just don't move as variably anymore. How we're built, that's why all those pains happen. The moment we start getting shoulder pain and the shoulder already doesn't move much, here's just a quick little thought experiment to consider to illustrate this. What do your arms do in everyday life? Like someone who sits at a desk, they're pretty much always out here in front. Slightly downward, slightly inward. When you're cooking, massaging the calves, or holding your phone in your hands, your arms are always in this position. But shoulders are built very differently. The shoulder joint actually has a very small socket and a relatively large head, which together provide a much greater range of motion and overall mobility. So basically, the arm should be held just as easily forward as it can be held when moved backward, equally well. Up just as much as down, and all these angles around here pretty much just fade away and disappear completely anyway too. So that means a normal person's shoulder is basically undersupplied, lacking the proper support it ought to have. Metabolism is much lower than it should be. Why? Because metabolism is driven by muscle movement and general bodily activity. When muscles move, the vessels, large, medium, small, and tiny capillaries, are squeezed together, briefly cutting blood flow, then immediately spring back into place. And that creates a flow, and it continues onwards through the interstitial tissue spaces. In the interstitial tissue, you've got all the fascial structures, and when those structures move, they behave like a lattice, a scissor grid, with clearly defined flow channels running throughout the tissue. The moment a shoulder only moves forward and just makes little circles out front instead of using the whole thing, the fascia keeps getting more and more tangled. We also know that from fascia research, and when you almost mat them, it means those flow channels, that shear grid structure, like with the intestinal stocking, that these channels become more and more irregular and aren't as permeable to flow anymore, greatly reducing fluid movement. That's just my personal take, but I'm pretty sure that ongoing research will increasingly demonstrate that that's indeed how it is in reality. Meaning not just in the vessels, the ones flowing in, the ones flowing back, and even in the lymph vessels throughout the entire body as well. No, even in the interstitial tissue, there are significant changes in flow patterns, so the fluid just can't move the way it used to anymore. Picture it like a pond where plants live, real plants, and as the overgrowth increases, it gets denser and blocks the flow, and eventually the pond degenerates and the fish can no longer survive in it. Their numbers crash and the whole little ecosystem collapses because there's no oxygen left and so on. So you can picture it as connective tissue and structures that aren't being moved anymore, slowly stiffening up and becoming stuck in place. That means it's already pretty restricted anyway. If the pain kicks in now, the shoulder pain specifically, we end up using that movement even less than before. That will be even lower. That means the load change will be even lower as well. And what happens when the flowing circuit falls asleep? We know from smokers who eventually have to have teeth removed because the teeth are already dead, because nothing's flowing anymore and nothing's moving over time and gradually. I know that's a pretty extreme example, I realize, but it makes perfectly clear what it's about. We need to keep the metabolism going. So, back to our third phase. What is the third phase now? We press against the wall again, but not with maximum force and not super intense or ramping up for a few seconds. Instead, we press as hard as we can, then relax and repeat that same pattern a few more times. Keep stretching, press it again, stay relaxed a bit, press, relax, keep going on. Maybe you've heard me say, press, relax, keep going, press, relax, keep going. Press, relax, and go deeper. And you get a lot more stretch because after each little tiring of the contraction, you can let go even more, allowing the muscles to ease further and the range to increase. So the stretch gets noticeably stronger. And the flow, the current of the fluids, is ramped up radically, becoming much more intense. That's great. I'm really excited about it myself because that means in the areas of the body where the metabolism has basically gone to sleep, where it's far too low, where nutrients no longer properly get to the cells, waste products can't be expelled, oxygen can't reach them, and so on. Right in those areas, we keep ramping up the metabolism more and more, boosting local circulation and cellular cleanup in the process. It's an automatic health side effect of the pain relief we're actually trying to achieve. This happens when you keep repeatedly tensing here between the first and the 1.5 minute, again and again over time and across sessions. Okay, so we only have 30 seconds left before the 2 minutes are up. So what exactly happens precisely during those final 30 seconds? So we stand there and actively pull our arms back as hard as we can, holding that tight position firmly, as hard as possible with all our strength, with all the strength we've got. Super valuable, because that influence is still missing. Why? What happens now? The moment I don't use the wall during passive stretching to press the arm back, but instead this function builds up the muscles on the backside, changing the movement subtly and altering the feedback. Then they have to work. And there's a basic rule in the body. If the arms are always out here in front, the front is short and tight, and the muscles at the back become long and consequently remain totally weak. That means this is basically strength training for the antagonists of the muscles we're stretching, the ones that usually have absolutely no strength, because the back muscles now have to strain to pull that off. They gain more strength. Sure. And the more vigorously I do it, the better. I always say, this is the greatest strength workout in the world because I can fully engage my back muscles. Really let them get a full workout. And up front, I even get a stretch as a result. But with this active stretching, that's what you call that activation, that tensing, the stretch intensity isn't that high, it's noticeably milder than a passive stretch, so it's gentler overall. Because the back muscles are too weak, they'll get stronger over time, but the force from the wall during passive stretching is higher. But I have a different effect that I don't get with passive stretching. I'm communicating now. That's my picture, my current impression and feeling. Now the muscles that pull the arm back are talking to the ones in the front. Since they pull back, the front ones have to give way and ease up a bit and relax a little more. That means they're talking to each other through the brain. And what exactly do they actually do while they're talking? I'd put it this way, from my belief, they're talking about how the one in the back, the one pulling, tells the one in front, give a little bit more now, please, because the joint feels uncomfortable. Because it's all measured in the brain. All that data comes back together again, like we said. That means there's now a coordinated matching or readjustment taking place among the muscles on the back, so to speak, the chest muscles, the pectorals themselves, and all the other muscles involved as well, including the surrounding supporting muscles. And that, I think, further refines how the joint moves in the socket, like how the head, for example, the shoulder, moves there, enabling smoother, more stable movement and better long-term joint health. So the body can deal with it optimally. And now, right now, we come to point 4. So, what exactly is point 4 then? Point 4 is the kind of stretch position you adopt when performing an exercise, which can really influence the end result. So, what are we stretching? As I mentioned at the start, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different stretches and subtle variations. There are great stretches in yoga and in a variety of other systems, and they're all valuable. They're all valuable and genuinely good. What we did was pick out exactly 27 options from among those thousands of possibilities that we found to be the most useful and practical overall. We could only do that because we always used pain therapy in parallel with osteopressure and manual treatment on the patients, consistently throughout their care. We could always match them up, which exercises, which points, which exact kind of pain. And what turned out to be were 27 bottlenecks in the body. What do we mean by bottlenecks? Quite simple. Muscles and fascia that, in most people, consistently shorten and become overly tight and tense, tend to get overly tight. And that's why there are basically 27 positions with variations now, because there are very unfit people, very athletic people, tall, short, and everything in between, so that anyone can work those tight spots really well. And these 27 exercises aren't all the exercises out there, but they're the ones we need to relieve pain from head to toe, covering every major area and common aches throughout the body, from migraines to heel spurs. About headaches, neck pain, shoulder pain, back pain from top to bottom, hip pain, knee pain, foot pain, toe pain, finger pain. I think I forgot shoulders, to cover them all perfectly and make sure nothing's missing. And it really depends a lot on how the stretch is set up. And I know many people say, yeah, it comes from yoga, it comes from this and that, stuff like that, really. Could be, and I know a lot of it's done there too, but it's the small specific details that really matter most in the end. It's about the details. I'll give an example. There are exercises where you prop yourself up on the floor and let yourself sag. But the really, really important thing for our pain is that you don't sag with your belly, but instead let the weight fall downwards properly from the groin area, not from the abdomen. And that's a huge difference because on the one hand, we've got the muscles that cause the pain because they're tight and they're stretching. Other times it's not in the stretch at all, and it keeps going like that through each of the 27 exercises. It totally depends on how exactly the position is done, and that's precisely defined for us. And then the exercises. For certain pains in 12 body areas are clearly and precisely defined. A fixed system showing for shoulder pain. These 4 or 5 exercises you could try out at home immediately. They've got to be done, and most of the time they really do tend to work. And if all that's properly in place, then comes the single most important point. And that's do you do it or not? I mean, do you seriously and consistently practice every day or not? And everyone knows the inner slacker, that term, and you ask yourself, why do you actually do it? You might know it, you might have felt it, but you still don't do it. And that's why it keeps holding you back. It's vital to understand. that with these 27 exercises, we're evening out a person's movement profile, helping to restore balance throughout their entire body. So, movement profile means you personally, you who are listening. How do you tend to move over the course of 24 hours and on average across the year? And if you've got shoulder pain, that means you moved in a way that led to shoulder pain, which over time has produced that persistent discomfort without you even knowing it, right? So, what do we do now? Well, for you, there are exactly 3 simple targeted exercises, for example. And these 3 exercises you have to do every day since you train every day. You train sitting, you train while you sleep, everything you do with your body. Whether it's active and moving or just lying there doing nothing, it doesn't matter. Everything trains your muscles and fascia. They adapt to whatever you do over time. And the exercises you're doing now, those 3 exercises, they make it possible for you to carry on with your life. You don't have to change a thing. You don't have to stop doing this or worry about that and all that. You're feeling too stressed. Keep living the way you want. But for your shoulder, correct the movement pattern that's causing the pain with these 3 simple exercises, starting today. And these 3 exercises take exactly 6 minutes. Is that a long time? No, that's a joke. And yet you have to do it. It's really hard to get into the habit on a regular basis. I've told you everything I know and that I think is important about it as best as I can. In the end, you really have to try it yourself to see if it actually works for you. But I'm telling you, millions have tried it, feel comfortable with it, and are getting better at managing their pain. You can be one of them too.